The gunshot that killed Kyle Grayson's wife echoed in his mind every single day, and for 730 days, he had not uttered a single word to another living soul. He lived on his ranch in the high desert country outside Boise, Idaho, where the land stretched endless and unforgiving under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The year was 1884, and Kyle had turned 27 just 3 months after burying Margaret in the small cemetery on the eastern edge of his property. He tended his cattle, mended his fences, and worked from sunup to sundown with a methodical precision that kept his hands busy and his mind from wandering too far into the darkness. When he rode into town for supplies, he pointed at what he needed and left coins on the counter. The shopkeepers had learned not to ask questions. The other ranchers had stopped trying to engage him in conversation. Even the drifters who occasionally passed through knew to keep their distance from the tall, broad-shouldered man with the haunted gray eyes and the permanent set to his jaw. His nearest neighbor had been old Samuel Pritchard, whose ranch sat about 3 miles south. Samuel had died that winter, and for months the property sat empty, the house slowly surrendering to the wind and weather. Kyle had watched it happen with a kind of grim satisfaction. The emptiness matched something inside him. Then one bright morning in late April, he saw smoke rising from Samuel's chimney. Kyle stood on his porch, coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips, staring at that thin column of smoke as if it were a personal insult. Someone had bought the place. Someone was moving in. Someone would try to be neighborly, and he would have to find new ways to avoid human contact. He set the cup down hard enough that coffee slopped over the rim, and he turned back into his house without another glance. 3 days passed before he saw her. He was checking the fence line that bordered the Pritchard property when he caught sight of a figure on horseback riding hard across the open ground. Even from a distance, he could tell it was a woman by the way she sat her saddle and the long, dark braid that flew behind her. She was chasing down a steer that had broken through a section of fallen fence, and she was doing it with a skill that made him pause despite himself. She cut the animal off, turned it, and drove it back toward her property with sharp, precise movements. When she dismounted to examine the broken fence, Kyle turned away and walked back to his horse. It was none of his business. The next morning, he found her standing on his porch. Kyle came out of the barn at dawn to find a woman in a split riding skirt and a man's work shirt waiting by his front door. She was younger than he had expected, probably 23 or 24, with dark brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes the color of strong coffee. She had a determined set to her chin and dirt under her fingernails. When she saw him, she smiled, and it was so unexpected that Kyle stopped walking. "Good morning," she called out. "I am Emma Mitchell. I bought the Pritchard place. I wanted to introduce myself to my neighbors." Kyle stared at her. His mouth stayed firmly closed. Emma's smile did not waver. "I noticed some of my cattle got onto your land yesterday. I fixed the fence, but I wanted to apologize for the trouble. I am still getting the place in order." Silence stretched between them. Kyle could see her smile starting to strain at the edges, but she held it. He walked past her to his porch, picked up the work gloves he had left there, and walked back toward the barn. "Well," Emma called after him, "it was nice meeting you, Mr. Grayson." He froze. She knew his name. Of course she knew his name. Someone in town would have told her about the neighbor who did not speak, the widower who had gone silent after his wife's murder. He could feel her eyes on his back, waiting for something, anything. He forced himself to keep walking. That should have been the end of it. But Emma Mitchell was not the type to give up easily. 2 days later, Kyle found a basket on his porch containing fresh bread, a jar of preserves, and a note written in neat, precise handwriting. Thank you for being patient with the fence situation. I hope you enjoy these. Your neighbor, Emma Mitchell. He left the basket sitting there all day. When evening came and the coyotes started stirring, he brought it inside. The bread was good, better than anything he had managed to make himself in 2 years. He ate half the loaf standing at his kitchen counter, and he hated himself a little for enjoying it. A week passed. Kyle saw Emma riding her property line, saw smoke from her chimney, saw her wagon heading into town. He made sure their paths did not cross. He had gotten good at being invisible, at sliding through the world without making contact. Then the storm came. It rolled in fast the way spring storms did in Idaho, turning the sky black and splitting it open with lightning. Kyle got his horses into the barn and secured everything that could blow away. The rain came down in sheets, and the wind howled like something alive and angry. He stood in his barn doorway watching it, and that was when he saw the rider. Emma was trying to get back to her ranch, but her horse was spooked and fighting her. Lightning cracked close enough that Kyle felt it in his bones, and the horse reared. Emma held on, but barely. Another bolt struck a tree not 50 yards from her, and the horse bolted. Kyle was on his own horse before he had time to think about it. He rode out into the storm, rain lashing his face and wind trying to tear him from the saddle. He could see Emma up ahead, still holding on but losing the fight. Her horse was in a full panic now, running blind. Kyle pushed his mount harder, closing the distance. When he got alongside her, he reached out and grabbed her horse's bridle, hauling back with all his strength. It took forever and no time at all. Finally, both horses stopped, sides heaving, eyes rolling white. Emma was soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, but she was still in the saddle. She looked at Kyle, and he saw no fear in her eyes, only determination and gratitude. "Thank you," she shouted over the storm. Kyle jerked his head toward his ranch. It was closer than hers. She nodded. They rode together through the downpour, and Kyle led her horse into his barn. Inside, the sound of rain on the roof was deafening, but at least they were out of the wind. Emma slid from her saddle and immediately went to her horse, running her hands over the animal's trembling flanks, speaking softly. Kyle unsaddled his own mount and rubbed him down, hyper-aware of the woman in his space, in his barn, in his carefully constructed solitude. "I should have headed back sooner," Emma said, still focused on her horse. "I saw the clouds building, but I thought I had more time. That was foolish." Kyle said nothing. He hung his saddle and started on her horse's tack. "Your horse is beautiful," Emma continued. "I have always loved chestnuts." "What is his name?" Kyle lifted her saddle off and carried it to the saddle rack. "The strong, silent type," Emma said, and there was amusement in her voice rather than irritation. "That is all right. I talk enough for both of us." She did. As they tended the horses and the storm raged outside, Emma filled the silence with words. She told him about buying the Pritchard Ranch, about growing up in Wyoming on her father's ranch, about deciding to strike out on her own after her father remarried, and his new wife made it clear there was not room for a grown daughter. She talked about her plans for breeding better cattle, about wanting to plant a real garden, about how much she loved the wild openness of Idaho. Kyle worked and listened. He had not realized how much he missed the simple sound of another person's voice until it filled his barn like music. Emma did not seem to expect responses. She just talked, easy and natural, like they were old friends. When the storm finally broke, the sun came out low and golden, turning everything to amber. Emma walked to the barn door and looked out at the transformed landscape. "Beautiful," she murmured. Kyle joined her, keeping a careful distance. The world looked new, washed and clean. "I should get back," Emma said. "Thank you for the rescue and the shelter." She turned to face him fully. And thank you for listening, even if you did not say anything. It helped." She collected her horse, mounted with easy grace, and rode toward home. Kyle watched her go, and something in his chest that had been locked tight for 2 years shifted, just a fraction. The next week, Emma showed up again. She rode over in the early morning with a toolbox strapped to her saddle. "I am trying to fix the water pump at my well, but it is being stubborn," she called out when she saw Kyle emerge from his house. "I do not suppose you have a pipe wrench I could borrow. I cannot find mine anywhere." Kyle walked into his barn and came back with the wrench. He held it out to her. Emma took it, her fingers brushing his for just a second. "Thank you. I will bring it back this afternoon." She was gone before he could react to the brief contact, the first time he had touched another person since Margaret's funeral. That afternoon, Emma returned with the wrench and a troubled expression. "I got the pump working, but there is something wrong with my windmill. One of the blades is damaged and I cannot reach it to fix it. I hate to ask, but you are taller than me. Would you be willing to take a look?" Kyle stood on his porch, the wrench in his hand, and looked at this woman who kept finding reasons to pull him into the world. He should say no. He should shake his head and close his door. Instead, he found himself putting on his hat and walking to his horse. Emma's face lit up. "Thank you, truly. I will pay you for your time." Kyle shook his head sharply. He did not want her money. They rode to her ranch together, and Kyle had to admit she had done impressive work in the short time she had been there. The house was clean and repaired, the barn was in good shape, and her small herd of cattle looked healthy. The windmill stood near the well, one blade bent at an awkward angle. Kyle examined it, then gestured for Emma's toolbox. It took him an hour to remove the damaged blade and bend it back into working shape. Emma stayed nearby, handing him tools when he pointed, talking the whole time about everything and nothing. She told him about a particularly stubborn cow she had named Beatrice, about the fox she had seen hunting rabbits near her property line, about her plan to ride into Boise the next week for supplies. When he finished, the windmill turned smoothly in the breeze. Emma clasped her hands together. "Perfect. You are a miracle worker. Please come inside. Let me at least give you some coffee and lunch." Kyle hesitated. Going into her house felt like crossing a line he had sworn not to cross. But Emma was already walking toward her door, clearly expecting him to follow. After a moment, he did. Inside, her house was simple but comfortable. She had made curtains for the windows, and wildflowers sat in a jar on the table. It looked like a home, not just a place to sleep. Kyle realized his own house had not looked like this in 2 years. He had let it become a shell, just walls and furniture with no life inside. Emma set about making coffee and putting together sandwiches with swift efficiency. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the table. "You have been working hard." Kyle sat, feeling awkward and out of place. When Emma set the coffee and food in front of him, he nodded his thanks. "You know," Emma said, sitting across from him with her own cup, "you do not have to talk if you do not want to, but I want you to know that I appreciate your help. I was not sure I could manage this place on my own, but I am determined to try. Having a good neighbor, even a quiet one, makes it easier." Kyle met her eyes. They were warm and kind, with no pity in them, just genuine gratitude and something else he could not quite name. He looked away first, focusing on his coffee. They ate in companionable silence, and when Kyle finished, he stood to leave. Emma walked him to the door. "Thank you again. For everything. You are welcome here anytime." Kyle nodded once and rode home, his mind full of thoughts he had not allowed himself in a long time. After that, Emma found reasons to visit regularly. She borrowed tools, asked for advice with gestures and questions that only required nods or shakes of his head, brought over food she claimed she had made too much of. Kyle found himself anticipating her visits, listening for the sound of hoofbeats, watching the horizon for her familiar figure. One afternoon in early June, Emma showed up with a problem that could not be solved with a nod. "I have a buyer interested in some of my cattle," she said, "but I need to drive them into Boise next week. It is only about 15 head, but I cannot manage them alone. I was going to ask in town if anyone wanted to hire on for a day's work, but I thought I would ask you first. I will pay the going rate." Kyle looked at her standing in his yard, hope and determination mixed on her face. He thought about saying no. He thought about shaking his head and closing himself off again. Instead, he found himself nodding yes. Emma's smile could have lit the whole territory. "Thank you. Thank you so much. We will leave Tuesday morning early. I will come by at dawn." The days until Tuesday felt different. Kyle found himself checking his gear, making sure his horse was in top condition, preparing as if for something important. On Monday evening, he stood in front of his small mirror and realized he needed a shave and a haircut. He had let himself go rough, and if he was going to ride into town with Emma, he did not want to embarrass her. He did his best with his razor and scissors, and when he was done, he looked more like the man he had been before, less like a hermit. Tuesday morning came clear and cool. Emma arrived at dawn as promised, and when she saw Kyle waiting with his horse saddled and ready, her smile was immediate. "You look nice," she said, and there was something in her tone that made warmth spread through his chest. They rode to her ranch and spent the next hour cutting out the cattle she wanted to sell. They worked well together, anticipating each other's movements, functioning as a team without needing words. By the time they had the small herd on the road to Boise, the sun was well up and the day was warming. The drive took most of the morning. Emma talked as they rode, telling him stories about her childhood, about her mother who had died when Emma was 16, about her father who had taught her everything about ranching. Kyle listened, occasionally glancing over at her animated face. She came alive when she talked about the things she loved, her whole being lit from within. "I know people think I am crazy for trying to run a ranch alone," Emma said at one point. "A woman alone in this country, it is not common. But I could not stay in Wyoming and watch my father's ranch become something I did not recognize. My stepmother wanted to make it all neat and civilized, wanted to bring in fancy breeding stock and turn it into some kind of showplace. That was not the life I wanted." Kyle understood that. He understood wanting to hold onto something real and true, even when the world tried to make you change it. In Boise, they delivered the cattle to the buyer Emma had arranged. The man was surprised to see Kyle with her, but did not comment beyond a nod of greeting. Money changed hands and Emma carefully tucked it into her pocket. "Success," she said quietly to Kyle. "Thank you for making this possible." They stopped at the general store for supplies. Inside, Kyle felt the familiar weight of people's eyes on him. The storekeeper, Harold Jennings, looked surprised to see him with Emma. "Miss Mitchell," Harold said, "good to see you again, and Mr. Grayson, this is unexpected." Emma stepped forward smoothly. "Mr. Grayson was kind enough to help me drive some cattle into town. I could not have managed without him." "I see," Harold said, his eyes moving between them with undisguised curiosity. "Well, what can I get for you folks?" Emma placed her order, and Kyle added a few items of his own with pointed gestures. Harold filled their requests, and Kyle could see the man's mind working, trying to understand this new development. When they left, Kyle could feel the whispers starting behind them. "Let them talk," Emma said as they loaded their supplies into her wagon. "Small towns thrive on gossip. We have given them something new to chew on." They rode back in the afternoon heat, the wagon loaded and their horses tied behind. Emma was quiet for a while, and Kyle wondered what she was thinking. Finally, she spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "You do not have to answer, obviously, but I want to ask anyway." Kyle glanced at her, tension creeping into his shoulders. "What made you stop talking?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight. "I heard some talk in town," Emma continued softly. "About your wife, about what happened. I am sorry. I cannot imagine that kind of loss." Kyle's hands gripped the wagon seat. He wanted to jump from the moving wagon to run to escape this conversation. But Emma's voice was gentle, not prying, just compassionate. "I do not need to know the details," she said. "But I want you to know that I understand silence. After my mother died, I did not speak for a month. I was so angry at the world, at God, at everything. My father let me be silent until I was ready to talk again. Sometimes silence is the only way to survive the pain." They rode on, and Kyle felt something loosening in his chest. Emma understood. She was not trying to fix him or change him. She was just acknowledging his pain without judgment. When they reached Emma's ranch, Kyle helped her unload the wagon. As he prepared to ride home, Emma touched his arm lightly. "Thank you for today, for all of it. You are a good man, Kyle Grayson." It was the first time she had used his given name, and hearing it in her voice did something to him. He nodded, not trusting himself to do anything else, and rode away. That night, Kyle lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling. He kept hearing Emma's voice saying his name, kept seeing her face when she smiled at him. He recognized what was happening, and it terrified him. He was starting to care about her. After 2 years of careful isolation, of keeping everyone at arm's length, Emma Mitchell had slipped past his defenses. He told himself to stop it, to rebuild his walls, to go back to being alone. But the next morning, when he heard hoofbeats, he found himself walking out to meet her instead of hiding inside. Emma rode up with a troubled expression. "I am sorry to bother you again, but I have a problem. 3 of my cattle are missing. I rode the property line this morning and found tracks heading north into the hills. I think someone took them." Cattle rustling was still common in Idaho in 1884. Kyle's expression hardened. He walked into his barn and came out with his rifle. Emma's eyes widened. "I do not want anyone to get hurt. Maybe we should report it to the sheriff." Kyle shook his head. By the time the sheriff got out here and organized a search, the cattle would be long gone. He gestured for Emma to lead the way. They followed the tracks north into the rough hill country where pines grew thick and the land turned rocky. Kyle read the signs easily. 3 cattle and 2 riders moving fast. They were maybe 4 or 5 hours ahead. The trail led deeper into the wilderness, and Emma stuck close to Kyle, her hand near her own rifle. Around midday, they heard cattle lowing up ahead. Kyle signaled for quiet, and they dismounted, moving forward on foot. Through the trees, they could see a small camp where 3 steers wearing Emma's brand were tied. 2 men sat by a fire, cooking something in a pan. "What do we do?" Emma whispered. Kyle studied the situation. The men did not look particularly dangerous, just opportunistic. He made a decision. He stepped out into the clearing, rifle held loosely but ready. The 2 men jumped up, reaching for their guns. "Hold it," one of them said, a thin man with a nervous face. "We found these cattle wandering." Kyle just stared at them, his eyes cold and hard. Emma stepped out beside him. "Those cattle have my brand on them. They were taken from my property." "Now listen, miss," the other man said, older and with a calculating look. "We can work this out. How about we give you 2 of them and keep 1 as a finder's fee?" Kyle raised his rifle slightly, the message clear. The thin man swallowed hard. "Maybe we should just let her have them all, Jed." Jed looked at Kyle, really looked at him, and whatever he saw made him raise his hands. All right, take your cattle, We do not want trouble." Emma moved forward and untied her steers. Kyle kept his rifle trained on the two men until Emma had the cattle moving back the way they came. He followed, walking backward for a while to make sure the rustlers did not try anything foolish. They did not. They just stood by their fire and watched them go. When they were well away, Emma let out a long breath. That could have gone much worse. Kyle lowered his rifle, the tension slowly leaving his shoulders. "You were very intimidating back there," Emma said, and there was admiration in her voice. "I think they were genuinely afraid of you." They drove the cattle back to Emma's ranch, and by the time they arrived, the sun was setting. Emma penned the steers and turned to Kyle. "Come inside, please. Let me make you dinner. It is the least I can do." Kyle hesitated, but Emma was already walking toward her house. He followed. Inside, Emma lit lamps and started preparing food. Kyle sat at her table, watching her move around the kitchen with practiced ease. It felt domestic and comfortable in a way that made his heart ache. This was what he had lost. This simple companionship, this warmth of another person sharing space with you. "I meant what I said earlier," Emma said as she worked, "about understanding silence. But I also want you to know that if you ever want to talk, I am here to listen. No pressure, no expectations, just an offer." Kyle watched her, this strong, kind woman who had ridden into his life and refused to let him stay buried in his grief. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The words were locked somewhere deep inside, rusty from disuse. Emma glanced over and saw his struggle. She set down what she was doing and came to sit across from him. "It is all right. You do not have to force it." Kyle shook his head. He wanted to talk. For the first time in 2 years, he actually wanted to speak. He tried again, his throat working, and finally a sound came out. Rough and barely audible, but a sound. "Thank you." Emma's eyes went wide. "Did you just speak?" Kyle nodded, his heart hammering. "Say it again." "Thank you." Stronger this time, though his voice was rough from disuse. Emma's face transformed with joy. "Your voice. I finally get to hear your voice." She reached across the table and took his hands without thinking. "This is wonderful." Kyle looked down at their joined hands. Her fingers were small in his, calloused from work but warm and alive. He turned his hands over, holding hers properly, and when he looked up, their eyes met. Something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that went beyond words. "Emma," Kyle said, testing her name with his voice. It felt right. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Yes, that is me." "And you are Kyle. It is good to finally have a proper introduction." They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined, eyes locked. Kyle felt something breaking open inside him, something that had been frozen solid for 2 years. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Emma finally released his hands and went back to cooking, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. It was charged with possibility. They ate dinner together, and Kyle managed a few more words. His voice was rough and unpracticed, but it was there. Emma asked him simple questions that he could answer briefly, never pushing, just encouraging. When it was time to leave, Emma walked him outside. The night was clear and full of stars. "Today was quite a day," she said softly. "Cattle rustlers and miracles." "Not a miracle," Kyle managed. "Just time. And the right person." He looked at her, really looked at her in the starlight. "Yes, the right person." Emma stepped closer. "I am glad I moved here, Kyle Grayson. I am glad you are my neighbor." "Me too," he said, and he meant it with everything in him. After that night, Kyle found his voice coming back slowly. It was easier with Emma than it would have been with anyone else. She never made him feel pressured or awkward about his long silences or his halting speech. She just accepted him as he was, silence and words both welcome. They fell into a routine over the next weeks. Kyle rode over to Emma's ranch most mornings, and they worked together on whatever needed doing. He helped her repair her barn roof, and she helped him move cattle to better pasture. They shared meals, shared stories, shared silence when words were not needed. Kyle told her about Margaret in pieces, a little at a time. How they had married young, how she had loved flowers and music, how she had been killed by a drifter who had broken into their house looking for money. How Kyle had been in town that day and had come home to find her. How he had tracked the man for a week and found him drunk in a camp 30 miles away. How the sheriff had taken the man into custody, but he had escaped before trial and disappeared. How Kyle had stopped talking because words had seemed useless and empty after that. Emma listened to all of it without judgment, without trying to offer empty comfort. She just held his hand and listened. In turn, Emma told him about her life in Wyoming, about the pain of losing her mother, about feeling pushed out of her home by a stepmother who saw her as competition rather than family, about the loneliness of striking out alone, about her fears that she would fail at running a ranch by herself. "I am not alone anymore, though," Emma said one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "I have you." "You have me," Kyle agreed, and the words felt like a promise. It was in mid-July when Kyle realized he was in love with her. They were riding together, checking Emma's fence line after a storm, and Emma was laughing at something, her face turned toward the sun, and Kyle felt it hit him like lightning. He loved her. He loved her strength and her kindness, her determination and her gentleness. He loved the way she talked and the way she listened. He loved that she had brought him back to life without even trying. The realization terrified him. Loving someone meant risking loss again. It meant making himself vulnerable to the kind of pain he had sworn never to feel again. He almost pulled back, almost retreated into silence and solitude. But when Emma looked over at him and smiled, he knew it was too late. He was already lost. That evening, as they sat on his porch for a change, Kyle gathered his courage. "Emma." "Yes." She turned to face him, her expression open and warm. "I need to tell you something." His voice was still rough, still unpracticed, but it was steady. "You changed my life. You brought me back from a dark place. I did not think I would ever feel alive again, but you made me feel." Emma's eyes went soft. "Kyle." "I am in love with you," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know it is fast, and I know I am probably not what you need, but I had to tell you. You deserve to know." Emma was quiet for a long moment, and Kyle's heart sank. He had made a mistake. It was too soon, too much. Then Emma reached over and took his hand. "Kyle Grayson, I have been waiting for you to realize that." "You have." "I fell in love with you weeks ago," she said simply. "Maybe even that first day in the storm when you came riding out to save me like something out of a story. I have never met anyone like you. You are strong and kind and decent, and yes, you have been hurt, but who has not been? I do not need you to be perfect. I just need you to be you." Kyle could barely breathe. "You love me." "I love you," Emma confirmed. "Very much." He pulled her closer, and she came willingly. They sat together in the dying light, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and Kyle felt peace for the first time in 2 years. The pain of losing Margaret would always be part of him, but it did not have to define him. He could love again. He could live again. "Will you marry me?" Kyle asked, the words surprising even him. Emma lifted her head to look at him. "That was quite a quick proposal, Mr. Grayson." "I already wasted 2 years," Kyle said. "I do not want to waste any more time." Emma's smile was radiant. "Then yes. Yes, I will marry you." Kyle kissed her then, gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as she responded. It felt like coming home. It felt like healing. They were married in August in a simple ceremony in Boise. The few friends Kyle had kept at a distance came, surprised but pleased to see him speaking again, to see him happy. The townspeople who had gotten to know Emma came to support her. The small church was full of well-wishers, and when Kyle said his vows in a clear, strong voice, there was not a dry eye in the congregation. Emma moved her cattle onto Kyle's larger ranch, and they combined their herds. They worked together every day, building something stronger than either of them could have managed alone. Emma's business sense and Kyle's experience created a thriving operation. By the following spring, they had doubled their herd and bought additional land. But more than the success of the ranch, it was the small moments that mattered. Emma singing while she cooked breakfast, Kyle reading aloud to her in the evenings from the newspapers and books she ordered from back east. The two of them sitting on the porch at sunset, her hand in his, watching the land they loved turn gold and purple in the fading light. In November, Emma told him she was pregnant. Kyle felt fear and joy war inside him. Fear that something would go wrong, that he would lose another person he loved. Joy at the thought of a child, of building a family with Emma. She saw the conflict on his face and took his hands. "I am frightened too," she admitted. "But we cannot let fear stop us from living. We will face whatever comes together." "Together," Kyle agreed, and he held her close, protecting her and their unborn child as best he could. The pregnancy was not easy. Emma was sick for months, and there were times when Kyle seriously considered riding to Boys and dragging the doctor back by force just to make sure everything was all right. But Emma endured it with the same strength she brought to everything, and slowly the sickness passed. Her belly grew round, and Kyle found himself talking to the baby through her skin, telling their child about the ranch, about the land, about how loved it already was. In June of 1886, on a warm evening when the light lasted forever, Emma went into labor. Kyle had arranged for a midwife from town to stay with them as the time grew close, and the woman, a capable older lady named Mrs. Henderson, took over the bedroom with calm efficiency. Kyle was banished to the main room where he paced like a caged animal. The labor lasted through the night. Kyle heard Emma's cries of pain and felt helpless, useless. He prayed to a God he had stopped believing in after Margaret's death, making desperate bargains. Let them both live. Let them be all right. Take anything else but leave them alive. As dawn broke, he heard a different sound. A baby's cry, thin and indignant. Kyle stopped pacing, his heart in his throat. Mrs. Henderson opened the door, her weathered face creased in a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Grayson. A healthy, loud son. And your wife is tired but well." Kyle did not remember crossing the room. He was suddenly in the bedroom doorway, staring at Emma propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but glowing. In her arms was a tiny red-faced creature wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your son," Emma said softly. Kyle approached slowly, almost afraid. Emma pulled back the blanket and Kyle looked down at his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus. As Kyle watched, the baby yawned, showing pink gums. "He is perfect," Kyle whispered. "He is ours," Emma said. "Do you want to hold him?" Kyle had never held a baby before, but he sat carefully on the edge of the bed and let Emma place the bundle in his arms. The weight was nothing, but the responsibility was everything. This tiny person was counting on him. This child was the future. "Hello, son," Kyle said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am your father. I am going to do my best by you, I promise." The baby seemed to listen, his unfocused eyes turned toward Kyle's voice. "What should we name him?" Emma asked. They had discussed names over the past months, unable to agree. But looking at his son, Kyle suddenly knew. "James, after your father, James Mitchell Grayson." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Really? You would do that? Your father taught you to be strong and independent. Those are good lessons. I want our son to have his name." "James," Emma said, testing it. "Yes, that is perfect." Mrs. Henderson stayed for a week, making sure Emma recovered properly and teaching them both how to care for a newborn. It was exhausting and terrifying and wonderful. James had healthy lungs and used them frequently, especially at night. Kyle and Emma took turns walking him, soothing him, learning his different cries and what they meant. One night, Kyle stood by the window with James in his arms, rocking gently while Emma slept. The baby had finally quieted, his little body warm and trusting against Kyle's chest. Kyle looked out at the moonlit land and thought about how much his life had changed. 3 years ago, he had been alone and silent, locked in grief. Now he had a wife he adored and a son who depended on him. He had a reason to live fully again. "Your mother saved me," Kyle whispered to the sleeping baby. "I was lost, and she found me. I am going to make sure you know how special she is, and I am going to teach you to be strong and kind like her. I am going to tell you about your grandmother who died before you could meet her, and about how love is worth every risk. I am going to be the best father I can be." James made a small sound in his sleep, and Kyle smiled. Life was not perfect. There would be hard times ahead, challenges and sorrows. But there would also be joy and love and moments like this, standing in the moonlight with his son while his wife slept nearby. That was enough. That was more than enough. As James grew, the ranch prospered. Kyle and Emma proved to be excellent parents, sharing the responsibilities of childcare and ranch work with equal dedication. James was a happy baby who grew into a curious toddler, always underfoot, always wanting to help. By the time he was 3, he was riding a small pony and following Kyle around the ranch like a shadow. In 1889, Emma told Kyle she was pregnant again. This time, the fear was less and the joy was more. They knew what to expect, and while pregnancy was never easy, Emma handled it better than the first time. In March of 1890, they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Margaret Rose, after Kyle's first wife and the flowers she had loved. Choosing that name had been Kyle's idea, and Emma had agreed immediately. "She was part of your life," Emma had said. "She helped make you who you are. It is right to honor her." Little Maggie, as they called her, was a tiny thing with Emma's dark hair and Kyle's gray eyes. She was quieter than James had been, more thoughtful, but with a stubborn streak a mile wide. James adored his little sister and appointed himself her protector from the moment he first held her. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch expanded. They built a bigger house to accommodate their growing family. They hired on a few hands to help with the work, good men who became like family. Emma's old ranch became a home for their foreman and his wife. Kyle remained a man of few words, but they were always the right words. He spoke when he had something worth saying, and his children learned to listen. He taught James to ride and rope, to read the weather and the land. He taught Maggie to be strong and independent, to know her own worth. He read to them both every evening, and he told them stories about the Wild West, about courage and honor and love. Emma thrived. She became known throughout Idaho as a shrewd businesswoman and a skilled rancher. Other women began ranching after seeing her success, and Emma always made time to help them, to share what she knew. She and Kyle became pillars of the growing community, hosting gatherings and helping neighbors in need. In 1895, news came that the drifter who had killed Margaret had been caught in Montana for another crime. Kyle and Emma traveled to give testimony at his trial, bringing closure to that chapter of Kyle's life. The man was convicted and sentenced to hang. Kyle watched the sentence handed down and felt nothing but a kind of weary relief. Justice, Late but real, on the ride home, Emma took Kyle's hand. "Is it over now? Really over?" "It was over years ago," Kyle said. "The day you rode into my life and would not take silence for an answer. That was when the past stopped owning me." "I am glad," Emma said. "I am glad I was stubborn." "I am glad you were stubborn too," Kyle said, and he kissed her hand. By 1900, James was 14 and working the ranch like a man, though Kyle made sure he got his schooling too. Maggie was 10 and already showing signs of her mother's head for business, keeping meticulous records of the ranch's breeding program in a series of notebooks. Kyle looked at his children and felt a pride so fierce it sometimes took his breath away. One evening, the whole family sat on the expanded porch watching the sunset. James was whittling something, Maggie was reading, Emma was mending a shirt, and Kyle was just watching them all content. This was his life now. This warmth, this family, this peace. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked, looking up and catching his expression. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Kyle said. "That I did not think life could be this good again, but you proved me wrong." Emma set aside her mending and came to sit beside him. After all these years, she still fit perfectly against his side. "We proved each other wrong," she said. "I thought I would be alone forever, running my ranch and being content with that. But you showed me that partnership is better than solitude, that love is worth the risk." "Always worth the risk," Kyle agreed. James looked up from his whittling. "Are you two being mushy again?" "Yes," Emma said cheerfully. "Get used to it," Maggie giggled. "I think it is sweet." "You would," James said, but he was smiling. Kyle pulled Emma closer and watched his children bicker good-naturedly. 17 years ago, he had been a broken man who had given up on life. Then, Emma Mitchell had moved onto the neighboring ranch and refused to let him stay lost. She had made him talk, made him feel, made him live again. She had given him a family and a future. The sun dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Kyle thought about speaking, about trying to put into words what he felt, but Emma squeezed his hand and he realized words were not necessary. She knew. She had always known. The night settled around them, bringing stars and the sounds of the ranch settling down. In the distance, cattle lowed. Closer, the horses moved in their stalls. Inside the house that they had built together, lamps glowed warm and welcoming. This was home. This was family. This was everything Kyle had thought he had lost forever, but had found again, because one determined woman had refused to accept his silence. As the years continued to unfold, the Grayson Ranch became one of the most successful in Idaho. James grew into a fine young man who eventually married a schoolteacher from Boise, bringing her home to help run the ranch. Maggie, true to her independent spirit, went to college in San Francisco and came back with a degree in agricultural science, determined to modernize the ranch's practices. She eventually married a fellow rancher, a respectful young man who appreciated her intelligence and drive. Kyle and Emma became grandparents multiple times over, their house filled with the chaos and joy of family gatherings. Kyle, who had once gone 2 years without speaking, found himself surrounded by voices he loved, telling stories to grandchildren who listened with wide eyes. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1911, Kyle and Emma took a rare day off from ranch work. They rode up into the hills together, just the two of them, to a spot they had discovered years ago where you could see for miles in every direction. They sat on a blanket and shared a picnic lunch Emma had packed. 25 years, Emma said, looking out at the view. Sometimes it feels like forever, and sometimes it feels like just yesterday that I moved here. Forever and yesterday both, Kyle agreed. His hair was gray now, and his face was weathered by decades of sun and wind, but his gray eyes were still sharp and clear. I would live them all over again. Even the hard parts, even the hard parts, they made us who we are. Emma leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence. Kyle had learned over the years that there were different kinds of silence. The silence of grief and isolation he had lived in after Margaret's death. The silence of peace and contentment he shared with Emma. The silence of understanding between two people who knew each other so completely that words were often unnecessary. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not moved here?" Emma asked. "Sometimes," Kyle admitted. "I think I would have stayed silent. I think I would have eventually sold the ranch and disappeared somewhere. I was dying, Emma. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. You saved my life." "We saved each other," Emma corrected gently. "I needed you just as much as you needed me. I was running from my past, hiding in independence because I was afraid of being vulnerable. You taught me that letting someone in is not weakness. It is courage." Kyle took her hand, the gesture as natural after 25 years as breathing. "I love you, Emma Grayson, more now than even on the day I married you." "I love you too," Emma said. "Always have, always will." They stayed on that hill until sunset, watching the light change across the land they had built their life on. When they finally rode back down, the ranch lights were glowing in the distance, and they could see their family waiting for them. James and his wife, Maggie and her husband, and a collection of grandchildren ran out to meet them, full of questions about where they had been. Kyle looked at Emma over the heads of their excited grandchildren, and she smiled at him. In that smile, Kyle saw everything. The young woman who had refused to accept his silence. The wife who had stood by him through every challenge. The mother who had raised their children with wisdom and love. The grandmother who spoiled her grandchildren shamelessly. The partner who had built an empire with him from dirt and determination. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Kyle and Emma sat on their porch one last time. Kyle had his arm around Emma, her head resting on his shoulder, and they watched the stars wheel overhead in the vast Idaho sky. "Thank you," Kyle said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For being stubborn enough to make me talk. For loving me even when I was broken." "You were never broken," Emma said firmly. "You were wounded. There is a difference. Wounded things can heal if they are given the right care and time. You just needed someone to believe in you. You did more than believe in me. You brought me back to life." Emma lifted her head to look at him. "We brought each other back to life. That is what love does, Kyle. It heals. It transforms. It gives us the courage to try again even after we have been hurt." Kyle kissed her forehead gently. "I am a better man because of you. And I am a better woman because of you. We made each other better. That is the best kind of love." They sat together in the darkness, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch, the life they had built together strong and enduring around them. Kyle thought about the man he had been, silent and lost in grief. He thought about the miracle of Emma riding into his life when he had needed her most. He thought about their children and grandchildren, about the legacy they were building together. Most of all, he thought about how love had found him twice in his life. The first love had been sweet and young, ending in tragedy. The second love had been hard-won and mature, forged in pain and silence but growing into something unbreakable. Both had shaped him. Both had mattered. But it was Emma who had shown him that love could bloom even in the hardest soil, that life could be rebuilt from ashes, that silence could be broken and the voice that emerged could speak of hope. In the distance, a coyote howled and another answered. The wind whispered through the pines. The stars shone down on the ranch where a man who had once sworn never to speak again now told stories every night to his grandchildren. Where a woman who had thought she would always be alone had built a family that would endure for generations. Kyle Grayson tightened his arm around Emma Mitchell Grayson, and she snuggled closer. They did not need words in that moment. They had something better. They had each other. They had a life built on love and determination. And they had the profound peace of knowing that they had taken their pain and transformed it into something beautiful. The night stretched on, and eventually they went inside to their bed, to sleep wrapped in each other's arms as they had done for 25 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new moments to fill with love and laughter. But tonight, Kyle and Emma were content to simply be together. Two people who had found each other when they both needed it most, who had made each other whole, and who would face whatever came next side by side. It was, Kyle reflected as he drifted off to sleep with Emma warm beside him, the best possible ending to a story that had started with 2 years of silence. Emma had made him talk, yes, but more than that, she had made him want to live again. And in the end, that was the greatest gift anyone could give. Not just voice, but life itself, full and rich and worth every moment. As the years continued their steady march forward, the Grayson family flourished. James took over more of the day-to-day ranch operations, showing a natural aptitude for leadership and a fair hand with the workers. His wife, Caroline, proved to be an excellent addition to the family, teaching the grandchildren to read and bringing culture to the rough ranch life with her piano playing and her love of literature. Maggie revolutionized the ranch's breeding program with her scientific approach, carefully tracking bloodlines and genetics in a way that seemed almost mystical to the older generation, but produced undeniably superior cattle. Her husband, Thomas, managed the financial side of things, proving that the ranch was not just a way of life but a solid business investment. By 1915, Kyle was 63, and Emma was 57. They had officially retired from the hardest physical labor, but remained active in decision-making and mentoring the next generation. Kyle's voice, once silent for 2 years, and then rough and uncertain when it returned, had mellowed into something warm and authoritative. He used it to tell stories, to give advice, to speak words of love and encouragement to his ever-expanding family. One autumn afternoon, Kyle found Emma in her garden. She had created a beautiful space over the years, filled with flowers and vegetables, a sanctuary of color and life. She was kneeling among the roses, her hair now streaked with silver but her movements still graceful and sure. "You are supposed to be taking it easy," Kyle said, coming to stand beside her. Emma looked up with a smile. "So are you, but here you are, checking on me instead of resting." "I rest better knowing where you are," Kyle admitted. Emma stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. "We have become those old married people, have we not? Cannot stand to be apart for more than an hour." "Is that so bad?" "Not bad at all," Emma said, taking his hand. "I rather like it." They walked together through the garden, past beds of late-blooming flowers and the vegetable patch that Emma insisted on maintaining even though they could easily buy anything they needed in boys. "I like having my hands in the dirt," she always said. "It reminds me I am alive." "Do you have any regrets?" Kyle asked suddenly. Emma looked at him in surprise. "Where did that come from?" "I was thinking this morning about all the years we have had together, about how everything turned out, and I wondered if you ever wished you had done things differently." Emma considered the question seriously. "I regret that I did not get more time with my mother. I regret that my relationship with my father became strained after he remarried. But as for us, for my choices to come here, to stay, to love you, not a single regret, Kyle Grayson, not one." "Good," Kyle said, relieved. "Because I have been thinking about what you said all those years ago about taking risks, about how love is worth it even when it is frightening. You were right." Every risk I took with you, every moment I opened myself up to feeling again, it was all worth it." "We built something good," Emma agreed. "Not just the ranch, but the family, the life. We took our pain and our loneliness and we forged something beautiful from it." That evening, the extended family gathered for Sunday dinner as they did every week. The large dining table Kyle had built years ago was crowded with children and grandchildren, with laughter and conversation flowing as freely as the food. Kyle sat at the head of the table, Emma at his right hand, and watched the family they had created together. James was telling a story about a particularly stubborn bull, making his children laugh. Maggie was engaged in a serious discussion with Thomas about market prices and breeding schedules. The grandchildren ranged from teenagers to toddlers, all of them healthy and loved and full of life. "Grandpa," called out his oldest grandson, a boy of 15 named Samuel after Emma's father. "Tell us the story about how you and Grandma met." The table quieted, everyone turning to look at Kyle. He caught Emma's eye and she nodded encouragingly. They had told this story many times, but it never got old. "Well," Kyle began, his voice carrying easily now, confident from years of use. "It was 1884 and I was living alone on this ranch. I had not spoken to anyone in 2 years, not a single word. I thought I was fine with that. I thought I wanted to be left alone forever." "Why did you not talk?" asked one of the younger grandchildren. "Because I was hurt," Kyle said honestly. They knew about Margaret, about the tragedy that had shaped his young life. Kyle had always been honest with his family about the past. "Sometimes when people are hurt badly enough, they close themselves off from the world. That is what I did. I stopped talking because it felt safer than feeling." "But then Grandma moved here," Samuel prompted, knowing the story but wanting to hear it again. "Then your grandmother moved onto the neighboring ranch," Kyle continued, smiling at Emma. "And she did not care that I would not talk. She just kept showing up, kept asking for help, kept talking to me like I was a normal person instead of the hermit everyone else thought I was." "I was persistent," Emma said with a laugh. "Some might say stubborn." "You were exactly what I needed," Kyle said firmly. "You did not try to fix me or change me. You just accepted me as I was, silence and all. But you also showed me, just by being yourself, that life was still worth living. That there were still good things in the world worth opening up for." "When did you talk again?" asked Maggie's daughter, a bright girl of 12 named Rose. "The day Emma asked me to help her track down some stolen cattle," Kyle said. "We rode out together, and when we got back, I realized I wanted to talk to her. I wanted to tell her thank you for everything she had done. So I did. It was just 2 words at first, rough and strange after 2 years of silence. But Emma smiled at me like I had given her the greatest gift in the world, and I knew I would keep talking just to see that smile again. That is when I knew I loved him," Emma said softly. "When he fought past his fear and his pain to speak to me. It was the bravest thing I had ever seen." "I thought riding out to save you in that storm was pretty brave," Kyle teased. "That too," Emma agreed, her eyes warm with love. "So you fell in love and got married and lived happily ever after," Samuel said, a touch of teenage cynicism in his voice. "Not quite," Kyle said. "Love is not magic. It does not solve all your problems or take away all your pain. Your grandmother and I worked hard to build this life. There were difficult times, setbacks, challenges, but we faced them together, and that made all the difference. Love is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone you want to face life with, someone who makes you better than you would be alone. And someone who makes you laugh," Emma added. "And someone who holds you when you cry. And someone who believes in you even when you do not believe in yourself." "All of that," Kyle agreed. The family continued with their dinner, but Kyle noticed the thoughtful expressions on several faces. He hoped his grandchildren would remember this story, would understand that love was worth fighting for, worth taking risks for, worth opening yourself up for even after you had been hurt. Later, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Kyle and Emma prepared for bed. It was a routine they had followed for decades, moving around each other with the ease of long practice. As they climbed into bed, Emma snuggled against Kyle's side, her head on his chest. "You think they understood?" Emma asked. "About what we told them tonight, some of them," Kyle said. "The older ones, maybe. The younger ones will understand when they are older, when they have loved and lost and loved again." "I hope they all find what we found," Emma said. "This kind of partnership, this depth of love, I want that for all of them." "They will find their own paths," Kyle said. "We raised them to be strong and independent and kind. The rest will follow." They lay together in the darkness, and Kyle listened to Emma's breathing slow and deepen as she fell asleep. He stayed awake a bit longer, thinking about the strange and beautiful path his life had taken. If someone had told him in 1884 that his life would turn out like this, he would not have believed them. He had been so certain that his story was over, that happiness was something that belonged to his past, but Emma had proven him wrong. She had moved onto the neighboring ranch and had refused to let him stay lost in his silence. She had made him talk, yes, but she had done so much more than that. She had made him live again. She had shown him that there was life after loss, love after heartbreak, joy after sorrow. Kyle pressed a kiss to Emma's forehead and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would come soon enough, with its work and responsibilities. But tonight, he was content to simply hold his wife and be grateful for every day they had been given together. The seasons turned as they always did. Winter came with its cold and snow. Spring brought new calves and green grass. Summer blazed hot and busy. Autumn painted the world gold and red. Kyle and Emma moved through the cycles of the year. Their lives intertwined so completely that it was hard to remember a time when they had been separate people. In 1920, as the world changed around them with new technologies and ideas, Kyle and Emma celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. The ranch had grown beyond anything Kyle could have imagined in those dark days after Margaret's death. It was a thriving enterprise that employed over 20 people and supported not just their immediate family, but the families of their workers. The anniversary celebration was a grand affair, with family and friends coming from all over Idaho and beyond. The party lasted 3 days, with feasting and dancing and storytelling. Kyle, now 68 but still strong and active, danced with Emma under the stars just as he had at their wedding all those years ago. 35 years, Emma marveled as they swayed to music played by a small band James had hired. "Where did the time go?" "Into building this," Kyle said, gesturing at the celebration around them, at their family laughing and dancing, at the ranch that stretched out into the darkness. "Into living fully instead of just surviving." "No regrets?" Emma asked, echoing his question from years before. "Not a single one," Kyle said firmly, "except maybe that I did not meet you sooner." "We met exactly when we were supposed to," Emma said. "Any earlier, and we would not have been ready for each other. Any later, and we might have been too set in our ways to take the risk." "You are probably right," Kyle conceded. "You usually are." Emma laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been when she was 24. "I am definitely right about that." They danced until the music stopped, and then they stood together watching their family celebrate. Kyle thought about that day 36 years ago when he had stopped speaking, when he had thought his life was effectively over. He thought about Emma riding up to his porch with her determined smile and her refusal to accept his silence. He thought about every day since, the good and the bad, the challenges and the triumphs. "Thank you," Kyle said again, as he had said so many times over the years. For what? Emma asked, also as she had asked so many times, for everything. For being stubborn, for refusing to let me stay silent, for loving me, for building this life with me, for every single day we have had together. Emma turned to face him fully, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. Kyle Grayson, loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life. Thank you for letting me in. Thank you for being brave enough to speak again, to love again, to live again. Thank you for every single day. They kissed, not caring that their grandchildren were making exaggerated gagging sounds and their children were smiling indulgently. After 35 years of marriage, they had earned the right to be demonstrative about their affection. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually Kyle and Emma slipped away to their bedroom. They were tired but happy, their hearts full of love and gratitude. As they lay in bed together, Emma traced patterns on Kyle's chest absently. "Do you remember what you said to me the night you proposed?" Emma asked. "I said I had already wasted 2 years and did not want to waste any more time," Kyle recalled. "Exactly. And you were right. We have not wasted a single moment, Kyle. We have lived every day fully, loved deeply, built something that will last long after we are gone. That is all anyone can hope for." "It is more than I ever thought I would have again," Kyle admitted. "After Margaret died, I thought I was done. I thought I would just exist until I died. You gave me back my life, Emma. You gave me a reason to live fully instead of just going through the motions." "We gave each other raisins," Emma corrected. "I was just as lost as you were, just in a different way. You gave me a home, a family, a partnership I had never believed possible. We saved each other." Kyle pulled her closer, and they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms as they had done thousands of times before and would do thousands of times more, God willing. The years continued their steady march. Kyle and Emma aged gracefully, their hair turning white, their movements slowing but their love remaining as strong as ever. They watched their grandchildren grow into adults, saw some of them marry and start families of their own, making Kyle and Emma great-grandparents. In 1925, Kyle suffered a mild heart attack. It frightened everyone, but he recovered with Emma's fierce determination and excellent nursing. The doctor told him to take it easy, to avoid stress, to act his age. Kyle ignored most of the advice, but he did agree to truly retire from ranch work, leaving everything in James and Maggie's capable hands. Emma also stepped back from her active role, and suddenly they had time. Time to sit on the porch and watch the world go by. Time to take long, slow rides through the property they loved. Time to read books aloud to each other. Time to simply be together without the constant press of work and responsibility. "I could get used to this," Kyle admitted one afternoon as they sat on their porch, Emma doing needlework while Kyle whittled. "Retirement suits you," Emma agreed. "Though I never thought I would see the day when you sat still for more than 5 minutes." "I am sitting still with you," Kyle said. "That makes all the difference." They fell into a comfortable routine in their retirement years. They traveled a bit, taking the train to San Francisco to visit friends, going to Denver to see one of Maggie's college classmates. But they always returned to the ranch with relief. This was home. This was where they belonged. In 1928, they celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their immediate family. Kyle was 76 now, Emma 70, and the years were showing more clearly. But when Kyle looked at Emma, he still saw the strong young woman who had ridden up to his porch in 1884. When Emma looked at Kyle, she still saw the man who had been brave enough to speak again, to love again, to take a risk on happiness. 43 years, Kyle mused. Nearly half a century together. "The best years of my life," Emma said simply. "Mine too. Even counting the years before I met you, even counting the good years with Margaret, these years with you have been the best. You made me whole again, Emma. You took a broken man and helped him rebuild himself into something better." "You were never broken," Emma insisted, as she always did. "Just wounded. And you healed. We healed each other." Kyle took her hand, his fingers wrapped around hers in a grip still strong despite his age. "I love you, Emma Mitchell Grayson. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Kyle Grayson. Always have, always will." They sat together as the sun set over the ranch they had built, over the life they had created. The land stretched out before them, dotted with cattle bearing the Grayson brand, fences that had been mended countless times, buildings that housed families who had worked for them for decades. It was a legacy of hard work and dedication, but more than that, it was a legacy of love. Kyle thought about speaking, about trying to put into words the profound gratitude he felt for every day he had been given with Emma. But as so often happened after decades together, Emma squeezed his hand, and he knew she understood without words. She had always understood him, from that very first day when he was silent and broken, and she had looked at him with compassion instead of pity. The evening star appeared in the darkening sky, bright and steady. Kyle and Emma watched it together, hands joined, hearts joined, their love as constant and enduring as that star. They had taken their separate sorrows and woven them into something beautiful. They had faced loss and loneliness and had chosen to risk love anyway. And in doing so, they had created not just a family or a ranch, but a testament to the power of human connection, the resilience of the human heart, and the transformative nature of love. As the night settled around them and the first hint of cold touched the air, Kyle and Emma rose and went inside together, to the home they had made, to the bed they had shared for over 4 decades, to the life they had built word by word, day by day, moment by precious moment. The man who had not spoken for 2 years had found his voice again, and the woman who had made him talk had found her home. Together, they had found everything they needed. It was, Kyle reflected as he drifted off to sleep with Emma warm and safe beside him, the perfect ending to a story that had started with silence but had become a symphony of love, life, and happily ever after.